People always say that when you're fighting for your life, your family becomes your everything. What they don't mention is how a brush with death can reveal who your family really is when they think you can't see them. My name is Eleanor Blackwood, and at 67, while lying unconscious in the ICU of Riverside General Hospital, I discovered that my 3 children had already written me off and were planning the vacation of a lifetime with my money. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The machines keeping me alive became silent witnesses to conversations I was never meant to hear. The morphine drip that was supposed to ease my pain couldn't numb the heartbreak of realizing that my recovery was inconveniencing their plans for paradise. But here's what my children didn't know about their supposedly dying mother. I've always been a fighter, and I was about to give them the surprise of their lives. Let me take you back to where this nightmare began, because what happened in that hospital room in Willowbrook changed everything I thought I knew about the children I'd raised and sacrificed for. It started with what should have been a routine procedure, and ended with me learning that sometimes the people closest to you are the ones planning to benefit most from your absence. I'd lived my entire life in the charming town of Willowbrook, nestled in the heart of the Cascade Valley. After my husband Theodore passed away 8 years ago from a sudden heart attack, I'd thrown myself into maintaining our family legacy. The Victorian house on Magnolia Street that we'd restored together, the antique shop downtown that had been my passion project, and most importantly, the substantial nest egg we'd built through decades of careful saving and smart investments. Theodore and I had always been planners. We'd scrimped and saved through the early years of our marriage, choosing family vacations at local lakes instead of exotic destinations, driving used cars until they literally couldn't run anymore, and investing every spare dollar we could find. By the time of his passing, we'd accumulated just over $850,000 in various accounts, plus the house and business that were both completely paid off. I'd always been transparent with my children about our financial situation. Not to brag or show off, but because Theodore and I believed that financial literacy was one of the greatest gifts we could pass down. Our 3 children, Marcus, aged 42, Vivian, aged 39, and Jonathan, aged 35, had all been raised with the understanding that this money represented decades of sacrifice and smart choices, and that it would one day help secure their own families' futures. Marcus worked as a regional sales manager for a pharmaceutical company in nearby Crestwood Hills, married to a woman named Delilah who managed a high-end boutique. They had 2 teenage children and lived in a sprawling suburban home with a mortgage that always seemed to be just slightly beyond their comfortable reach. Vivian had followed her artistic passions and ran a successful graphic design studio in the arts district of Maplewood, though her income fluctuated wildly depending on client contracts. She'd never married but lived with her partner Cameron in a converted warehouse loft. Jonathan, my youngest, had struggled the most to find his footing. He'd bounced between various careers, from real estate to personal training to cryptocurrency, trading, and was currently between jobs while living in a rented cottage near Sunset Ridge. Despite their different paths, I'd always maintained close relationships with all 3 children. Sunday dinners at my house were sacred, holiday traditions were non-negotiable, and I made sure to be present for every important milestone in their lives and their children's lives. When Marcus's son needed help with college tuition, I'd quietly contributed $15,000. When Vivian's design studio needed new equipment during the pandemic, I'd helped with a $8,000 loan that she was slowly paying back. And Jonathan? Well, Jonathan had needed help more times than I could count, from car repairs to rent assistance to funding his various business ventures that never quite panned out. I thought we were a close family. I thought they saw me as more than just their eventual inheritance. The medical crisis that would change everything started innocuously enough. I'd been experiencing some digestive issues for a few weeks, nothing dramatic, just persistent discomfort and occasional nausea that I'd attributed to stress from managing the antique shop alone. When the symptoms persisted, my doctor, Patricia Hendricks, recommended what she called a routine exploratory procedure to rule out anything serious. "It's probably just inflammation, Eleanor," Dr. Hendricks had assured me as we scheduled the laparoscopy at Riverside General. "We'll take a look, maybe remove any scar tissue we find, and you'll be back to your normal routine within a week." I'd informed the children about the procedure, downplaying its significance because I genuinely believed it was minor. "Just a little outpatient thing," I'd told them during our regular Sunday dinner. "Nothing to worry about, but I wanted you all to know in case Dr. Hendricks needs to reach any of you." What Dr. Hendricks found during that routine procedure was a massive internal infection that had been silently spreading for months, complicated by adhesions from an appendectomy I'd had decades earlier. What should have been a simple hour-long procedure turned into emergency surgery lasting nearly 6 hours. The infection had caused significant complications, and I'd gone into septic shock on the operating table. I woke up 3 days later in the ICU, connected to more machines than I'd ever seen in one place. The first face I saw was Dr. Hendricks, her expression serious but hopeful. "Eleanor, you gave us quite a scare," she said, checking the various monitors surrounding my bed. "The infection was much more extensive than we anticipated, but we've gotten it under control. You're going to need to stay here for at least another week, maybe 2, while we make sure your body is responding properly to the antibiotics." The next few days passed in a haze of medications, tests, and gradual improvement. The children visited, of course, bringing flowers and concerned expressions. Marcus came by after work most evenings, updating me on his teenager's activities and sharing office gossip. Vivian stopped by during her lunch breaks, bringing magazines and describing her latest design projects. Jonathan visited less frequently, but always stayed longer, chatting about his current job search and his hopes for finally finding his career direction. They all seemed appropriately worried and supportive. They asked about my comfort, brought me items from home, and assured me they were taking care of everything while I recovered. I felt grateful for their attention and love, even as I struggled with the frustration of being so helpless and dependent. It was on my 6th day in the ICU, during one of those twilight periods when the pain medication made me drowsy but not quite asleep, that I overheard the conversation that would shatter everything I believed about my children and change the course of our family forever. The machines around me hummed quietly, monitoring my vital signs and dispensing medications through multiple IV lines. The ICU was designed for privacy, but the thin walls between rooms weren't soundproof, especially when people spoke in the confident tones of those who believed the patient couldn't hear them. That's when I learned that my children had been planning something that would show me exactly where I stood in their priorities, and exactly how they viewed my role in their lives now that I was vulnerable and dependent on others for my very survival. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Before we dive deeper into what I discovered lying in that hospital bed, I want to know where you're watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below. Are you from a small town like Willowbrook? Or are you tuning in from somewhere far away? And if this story is hitting close to home already, make sure you hit that subscribe button because what I'm about to share with you will shock you to your core. Tomorrow, I've got an even more unbelievable family story that will make you question everything you think you know about the people closest to you. The conversations I was about to overhear were like storm clouds gathering on a horizon I couldn't yet see. Sometimes the most devastating betrayals come not from strangers or enemies, but from the very people who are supposed to love you unconditionally. What I learned during those supposedly unconscious moments would reveal that the children I'd raised, sacrificed for, and loved without reservation had been viewing my medical crisis through a lens I never could have imagined. You know, when you're lying in an ICU bed, connected to machines that are literally keeping you alive, you become invisible in a way. Medical staff whisper around you, family members speak freely near your bed, and everyone assumes that the combination of medications and medical trauma has rendered you unaware of your surroundings. In many cases, they're right. But sometimes, just sometimes, a patient is more alert than anyone realizes. The irony wasn't lost on me that the same fighting spirit that was helping me recover from septic shock was also about to reveal truths that no mother should ever have to hear. The same determination that had helped Theodore and me build our life savings from nothing, that had carried me through 8 years of widowhood, that had sustained me through raising 3 children as a working mother, was now forcing me to stay conscious during conversations that would have been easier to miss. I want you to understand something important about the kind of mother I'd been, because it makes what happened next even more heartbreaking. I wasn't one of those distant, cold parents who viewed their children as burdens or mistakes. Theodore and I had planned each of our children, celebrated each pregnancy, and thrown ourselves into parenthood with the kind of enthusiasm that bordered on obsession. When Marcus was born, I took a year off from my job at the Willowbrook Community Bank to focus entirely on being his mother. When Vivian arrived 3 years later, I arranged for part-time work so I could be present for both children's needs. By the time Jonathan came along, I developed a system that allowed me to be room mother, soccer team coordinator, and the parent who never missed a school play or graduation ceremony. But my devotion went far beyond just showing up. I was the mother who stayed up until 2 a.m. helping with science fair projects, who drove across 3 counties to find the exact costume piece needed for the school play, who saved for months to afford the summer camps and music lessons that would enrich their childhoods. When other parents complained about the cost and time demands of raising children, I genuinely couldn't relate. To me, every sacrifice was an investment in their futures and an expression of my love. Even after they'd grown up and moved out, I maintained that same level of involvement and support. I was the grandmother who never missed a birthday party, the mother who showed up with homemade soup when anyone was sick, the family member who could always be counted on for both emotional support and financial help when times got tough. The years since Theodore's death, that role had actually intensified. With no spouse to share my attention or resources, my children and their families had become the sole focus of my energy and generosity. Every decision I made, from how to invest the life insurance money to whether I should downsize the house, was filtered through the question of how it would impact them. I'd assumed they understood this. I'd assumed they recognized the depth of my commitment to their well-being and happiness. I'd assumed that when I needed them most, they would respond with even a fraction of the dedication I'd shown them throughout their lives. The medical team at Riverside General had been nothing but professional and optimistic about my recovery. Dr. Hendricks had explained that while the septic shock had been serious, my overall health and fitness level meant I had an excellent chance of making a full recovery. "You're stronger than most patients half your age," she'd told me encouragingly. "We're looking at a few more days in the ICU, then a week or so in a regular room, followed by a couple of weeks of rest at home." The physical therapy team had already begun working with me on basic movements to prevent complications from extended bed rest. The nutritionist had developed a plan to rebuild my strength. Everyone involved in my care was focused on getting me back to my normal, independent life as quickly and safely as possible. What none of the medical professionals could have prepared me for was the emotional trauma that was about to unfold. No amount of antibiotics could fight the infection of betrayal that was about to spread through my family relationships. No monitors could detect the heartbreaking arrhythmia that was about to disrupt everything I believed about the people I loved most. The morning of day 6 started like all the others. Nurses checking vitals, medication adjustments, gradual improvements in my strength and clarity. Dr. Hendricks had even mentioned the possibility of moving me to a regular room within the next day or two, which felt like a monumental step toward recovery. Marcus had stopped by early, before heading to work, bringing coffee for himself and chatting about his morning routine. Vivian had texted that she'd be by during lunch with some books she thought I'd enjoy. Jonathan had called the night before to say he'd visit later in the afternoon. Everything seemed normal. Everything seemed like the appropriate response of concerned, loving children supporting their mother through a medical crisis. But sometimes normal is just a carefully constructed facade, and sometimes the people we trust most are simply better actors than we ever realized. The conversation I was about to overhear would strip away that facade and reveal motivations so shocking, so completely contrary to everything I believed about my children, that it would fundamentally alter not just our relationships, but my entire understanding of who they really were when they thought no one was watching. What I learned in those next few minutes would prove that my recovery, the thing I'd been fighting so hard to achieve, was actually the last thing my children wanted to see happen. The afternoon of my 6th day in the ICU, I was drifting in that strange space between sleep and wakefulness that hospital patients know so well. The pain medication had been reduced as my condition improved, leaving me more alert, but still physically weak. My room in the cardiac intensive care unit was positioned at the end of the hallway, and the family consultation room was directly adjacent to my space, separated only by a thin wall that had clearly been designed more for privacy than soundproofing. I heard my children's voices before I saw them. Marcus's deep, measured tone that he'd inherited from his father. Vivian's animated speaking style, always punctuated with hand gestures even when no one could see her. And Jonathan's younger voice, still carrying hints of the uncertainty that had characterized him since childhood. They were speaking in hushed tones initially, the kind of respectful quiet you maintain in hospitals out of consideration for other patients and families dealing with their own medical crises. "The nurses said she's been improving steadily," Marcus was saying, and I could hear the sound of chairs being arranged around what I knew was a small round table in the consultation room. "Dr. Hendricks thinks she might be moved to a regular room tomorrow or the day after." "That's good news," Vivian replied, though something in her tone seemed oddly flat. "How long until she can go home?" "Probably another week or 10 days total," Marcus answered. "Then she'll need some recovery time at home. Dr. Hendricks mentioned maybe 2 or 3 weeks of taking it easy before she's back to her normal activities." This was all information I'd heard directly from my medical team, so nothing surprised me about their conversation so far. What struck me as slightly odd was the clinical way they were discussing my condition, as if they were talking about a project, timeline rather than their mother's health. But I attributed this to stress and the strange emotional numbness that often accompanies medical crises. Jonathan's voice came next, and this is where the conversation took its first unsettling turn. "So we're looking at about a month total before she's completely back to normal?" "That's what it sounds like," Marcus confirmed. "Why?" The silence that followed lasted just a few seconds too long. In that pause, I felt the first prickle of unease, though I couldn't have articulated why. It was the kind of silence that precedes a statement someone has been rehearsing, the quiet breath before a difficult conversation begins. "Well," Jonathan said slowly, "I've been thinking about the timing of all this, and there might be an opportunity here that we should consider." "What kind of opportunity?" Vivian asked, her voice sharpening with interest. "Remember how we talked about taking that family trip to Hawaii? The one we've been planning for the past 2 years but could never coordinate because of everyone's schedules and, honestly, because none of us could afford it without help?" My heart rate monitor must have registered a slight increase because I became aware of a subtle change in the beeping pattern. The trip Jonathan was referring to had indeed been a topic of discussion for the past couple of years. All 3 of my children, along with their families, had dreamed of taking a multi-generational vacation to Maui. We'd looked at rental houses that could accommodate everyone, researched activities that would appeal to both adults and teenagers, and even identified the best time of year for weather and pricing. The estimated cost for such a trip, including flights, accommodations, meals, and activities for 11 people total, was approximately $45,000. It was the kind of expense that would require careful planning and saving, or alternatively, the kind of expense that could be covered by someone with substantial savings who wanted to create magical memories for the entire family. I had always assumed that when we eventually took this trip, I would be a central part of the planning and the experience. In my mind, it would be my gift to the family, a way to use Theodore's life insurance money and our lifetime of careful saving to create the kind of experience that would bond us all together and give the grandchildren memories they'd treasure forever. I remember the Hawaii discussions, Marcus said carefully. But Jonathan, this isn't exactly the time to be thinking about vacations. Mom just had major surgery. That's exactly my point, Jonathan continued, his voice gaining confidence. She's going to be laid up for a month anyway. She can't travel, can't really do much of anything except recover. And the doctor said the hardest part is over. Now, it's just rest and healing. I'm not following your logic, Vivian said, though her tone suggested she might be starting to understand. Think about it, Jonathan pressed on. We've all been stressed about Mom's condition. We've been taking time, off work, rearranging our schedules, dealing with the emotional strain of almost losing her. We're going to need some recovery time too, right? Some way to decompress and reconnect as a family. The beeping from my heart monitor definitely increased then, though I fought to keep my breathing steady and my body still. A terrible understanding was beginning to dawn on me, but I couldn't quite believe what I was hearing. Are you suggesting, Marcus said slowly, that we take the Hawaii trip now? While Mom is recovering? Why not? Jonathan's voice was gaining enthusiasm. She'll be fine. The medical team has everything under control. She'll probably sleep most of the time anyway while her body heals. And honestly, there's not much we can do here except sit around and worry. Jonathan, Vivian said, and I could hear her shifting in her chair. That seems incredibly insensitive. What if something goes wrong? What if she needs us? What could go wrong that the hospital staff can't handle better than we can? Jonathan countered. We're not doctors. We're not nurses. We're just taking up space in waiting rooms and adding to our own stress levels. The room fell quiet again, and I realized I was holding my breath. Surely Marcus and Vivian would shut down this absurd suggestion immediately. Surely they would remind Jonathan that family members don't abandon each other during medical crises, regardless of how confident the prognosis might be. Instead, Marcus spoke in the measured tone he used when he was thinking through a complex problem. The timing would actually work well from a practical standpoint. Mom will be here for another week, then home recovering for 2 or 3 weeks. If we booked something for 2 weeks from now, she'd be past the critical period but still in recovery mode. My blood felt like it was turning to ice water. Marcus wasn't rejecting Jonathan's suggestion, he was refining it. Plus, Vivian added, and her voice carried a note of excitement that made my stomach clench. The rental prices are actually lower right now because it's not peak season. We might be able to get that house in Maui we looked at last year for significantly less money. Exactly, Jonathan said, clearly thrilled that his siblings were considering the idea. And think about how much we all need this. Marcus, you've been working overtime for months. Vivian, your business has been incredibly stressful. I've been dealing with the job search pressure. This health scare with Mom has just added to everything. It would be nice to have something positive to focus on, Marcus admitted. Something to look forward to instead of just worrying about complications and recovery timelines. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My children were seriously discussing abandoning me during my recovery period to take a luxury vacation. But what came next was even worse than their casual abandonment. It was their discussion of how to fund this betrayal. There's just one issue, Vivian said, her voice taking on a practical tone. The money. Even with lower rental rates, we're still talking about at least $35,000 for all of us, maybe $40,000 if we want to do some of the activities we discussed. Well, Jonathan said, and I could hear a smile in his voice. That's where Mom's situation might actually work in our favor too. The heart monitor's beeping became noticeably faster, and I prayed that no nurse would choose this moment to check on me. I needed to hear what Jonathan was about to propose, even though I suspected it would devastate me. "What do you mean?" Marcus asked. "Think about it," Jonathan continued. "Mom has been incredibly generous with all of us over the years. She helped with your kids' college expenses. She supported Vivian's business during COVID. She's bailed me out more times than I can count. She's always said that her money is really family money, right? That she's just the steward of what Dad built for all of us?" "That's true," Vivian said slowly. "She's always been very clear that she considers her savings to be our inheritance, just managed by her until we need it. And right now," Jonathan pressed on, "we need it. We need this trip, this break, this chance to reconnect as a family during a stressful time. Mom would understand that. She'd probably insist on paying for it if she were in any condition to make that kind of decision." The room fell silent again, and in that silence, I felt something fundamental break inside my chest. It wasn't my surgical incisions or my recovering organs, it was my heart, shattering as I realized that my children were discussing stealing from me while I lay unconscious in a hospital bed, justifying it by claiming I would approve of their betrayal. What happened next in that consultation room would reveal the true architect of this betrayal, and it wasn't who I expected. Marcus cleared his throat in the way he always did when he was about to address something uncomfortable. A habit I'd noticed since he was a teenager trying to explain a poor report card or a missed curfew. "Jonathan, I understand the appeal of this idea," Marcus began carefully, "but there are some practical issues we need to consider. Mom's accounts aren't joint accounts. We can't just access her money without her knowledge or permission." "Actually," Vivian interjected, and her tone carried a confidence that immediately caught my attention. "That might not be as complicated as you think." This was the moment when the conversation shifted from disappointing to genuinely alarming. Vivian had always been the most organized of my children, the one who helped me set up my online banking, who assisted with filing my taxes each year, and who had insisted on being added as an emergency contact on all my financial accounts after Theodore died. "What do you mean?" Jonathan asked, leaning forward in his chair. I could hear the creak of the hospital furniture. "Remember when Dad died and we had to deal with all the financial stuff?" Vivian said. "Mom was so overwhelmed with grief and all the paperwork that I helped her organize everything. She added me as a secondary signer on most of her accounts. Not joint ownership, but authorized access for emergencies." My mouth went dry as I remembered those horrible weeks after Theodore's funeral. Vivian had indeed been incredibly helpful, spending hours with me at Cascade Valley Community Bank, organizing documents, setting up automatic bill payments, and ensuring I could manage our finances during my period of intense grief. I had been so grateful for her assistance and so touched by her willingness to take on these tedious but necessary tasks. At the bank manager's suggestion, I had added Vivian as an authorized user on several accounts, including my primary savings account and checking account. The bank manager, Patricia Holloway, had explained it as a simple precaution. "If something happens to you, Mrs. Blackwood, your daughter will be able to handle necessary expenses and transactions without waiting for probate court," she had said. It was meant to be a safety net, a way to protect the family's financial stability if I became incapacitated. I never imagined it would become a tool for my children to raid my life savings while I lay helpless in a hospital bed. "You mean you can access Mom's accounts right now?" Marcus asked, his voice a mixture of surprise and something that sounded uncomfortably like excitement. "Technically, yes," Vivian replied. "The bank signature cards list me as authorized for emergency access. I have the account numbers, the routing information, everything." "But this isn't an emergency," Marcus protested, though his tone suggested he was trying to convince himself as much as anyone else. "This is us wanting to take a vacation." "Isn't it an emergency?" Jonathan jumped in eagerly. "Think about what we've all been through this week. The stress, the uncertainty, the fear that we might lose Mom. We're emotionally exhausted. We need time to recover and reconnect as a family. If that's not an emergency, What is? I could hardly believe the sophistication of their rationalization. They were reframing their desire for a luxury vacation as a medical necessity, justifying theft as therapy. Plus, Vivian added, and I could hear papers rustling as if she was consulting notes. Mom has always said that her money is really family money. She's told us dozens of times that she's just managing Dad's life insurance and their savings until we need it. Well, right now, we need it. Has she actually said we could use it whenever we wanted? Marcus asked, and I found myself clinging to hope that at least one of my children would maintain some ethical boundaries. Not in those exact words, Vivian admitted. But think about her actions over the years. Every time one of us has had a financial need, she stepped up immediately. Your kid's college funds, my business loan, Jonathan's various situations. She's never hesitated to help family. That's different, though, Marcus said, though his voice was weakening. Those were specific needs that we discussed with her. This is us taking money without asking for something she might not approve of. How could she not approve of a family trip? Jonathan demanded. She's been talking about this Hawaii vacation as much as any of us. She's the one who originally suggested it might be nice to use some of Dad's life insurance money for making memories instead of just sitting in accounts. This was true, and the fact that they were using my own words against me felt like an additional betrayal. I had said something similar about 6 months earlier, when we were all gathered for Sunday, dinner and discussing dream vacations. I had mentioned that Theodore wouldn't want his life insurance money to just sit earning minimal interest when it could be used to create meaningful experiences for the family. But I had always imagined being part of those experiences, not funding them from a hospital bed while my children enjoyed paradise without me. Look, Vivian said, her voice taking on the authoritative tone she used when presenting design proposals to clients. Let's think about this logically. Mom is going to be fine. The doctors have been very clear about that. She's past the dangerous period, and now it's just recovery time. She'll be sleeping and resting for the next few weeks anyway. And, Jonathan added enthusiastically, think about how happy she'll be when she's fully recovered to hear about our trip. She'll love seeing all the photos, hearing about the kids' experiences, knowing that we took time to bond as a family during a difficult period. We could even bring her back something special, Vivian suggested. Maybe one of those beautiful Hawaiian quilts she's always admired, or some of that macadamia nut coffee she loves. I felt nauseated by their casual discussion of souvenirs purchased with my stolen money, tokens meant to distract me from their betrayal. But what came next was even worse. There's something else to consider, Marcus said, his voice dropping to an even lower volume. The timing might actually be perfect for another reason. What do you mean? Vivian asked. Well, if Mom's recovery takes as long as Dr. Hendricks suggested, she might not be back to managing her own finances for several weeks. If we handle this transaction carefully, time the trip right, and make sure all the expenses look legitimate. He didn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. They were discussing how to hide their theft from me, how to cover their tracks so I wouldn't discover what they'd done until it was too late to stop them. Marcus, Vivian said slowly, are you suggesting we take this money without telling Mom? Silence that followed was the most deafening sound I'd ever heard. In that pause, I understood that my eldest child, the one I'd always considered the most responsible and ethical, was seriously considering participating in what amounted to elder financial abuse. I'm suggesting, Marcus finally said, that we take a family vacation during a stressful time, using family money, with the intention of telling Mom about it when she's strong enough to hear about all the wonderful memories we made. The euphemistic language couldn't disguise what they were really discussing. They wanted to steal approximately $40,000 from my savings account to fund a luxury vacation to Hawaii, and they wanted to do it while I was incapacitated and unable to stop them. How exactly would this work? Jonathan asked, his voice barely containing his excitement. I could transfer the money to my personal account, Vivian explained matter-of-factly. Then we book everything. Flights, rental house, activities. We use my credit cards for the deposits and pay them off immediately with the transferred funds. That way, if Mom checks her account statements later, she'll just see a transfer to my account, not a bunch of travel-related charges. And if she asks about the transfer? Marcus inquired. We tell her the truth. Eventually, Vivian replied. We explain that we needed some family time during a difficult period, that we knew she'd want us to take care of ourselves, and that we used family money for a family purpose. By then, the trip will be over, the memories will be made, and honestly, what's she going to do? Demand we give her back the money we've already spent? Plus, Jonathan added with a note of triumph in his voice, she'll probably be so happy that we had a good time and that the family stayed close during her health crisis that she won't even be upset. I lay in that hospital bed, connected to machines monitoring my vital signs, listening to my 3 children plan the most elaborate betrayal I could have imagined. They weren't just stealing my money. They were stealing it with a sophistication that suggested they'd been thinking about accessing my accounts for some time. This wasn't a spontaneous decision driven by stress. This was an opportunistic exploitation of my vulnerability. The conversation in the consultation room continued for another 20 minutes, and with each passing moment, I watched my children transform from people I thought I knew into strangers capable of elaborate deception. What disturbed me most wasn't just their willingness to steal from me, but the methodical way they planned to manipulate both the situation and my emotions to justify their actions. We need to think about timing carefully, Vivian said, and I could hear her tapping what sounded like a pen against the table. If we're going to do this, we need to move quickly while Mom is still in recovery mode and not actively monitoring her accounts. How long do we have? Jonathan asked. Dr. Hendricks said Mom would probably be pretty drowsy and unfocused for at least another week while she's still on pain medications, Marcus replied. Then she'll be home recovering for 2 or 3 weeks after that, so maybe a month total, before she's really back to her normal routine. That's perfect, Vivian said with satisfaction. I can make the transfer tomorrow morning when the bank opens. We can book the flights and accommodation immediately, and we could potentially travel as early as next week. While I was still in the hospital, they wanted to be sipping Mai Tais on a beach in Maui, celebrating their successful theft of my life savings. What about the kids' schools? Marcus asked. And for a moment I thought he might be developing second thoughts. Taking them out for a week isn't ideal. It's educational, Jonathan said quickly. They'll learn about Hawaiian culture, marine biology, geology. We can frame it as an educational family trip. Plus, Vivian added, given what they've been through with Grammy being so sick, their teachers will probably be understanding about them needing some family time. My grandchildren. They were planning to use my own grandchildren as props in their deception, telling teachers that the family needed time together because of my medical crisis, while actually abandoning me to enjoy a luxury vacation I would be funding unknowingly. Speaking of the kids, Marcus said, what do we tell them about why Grammy isn't coming? This question hung in the air, and I found myself holding my breath despite the mechanical ventilation assistance I was still receiving. How exactly did they plan to explain to their children that grandmother was too sick to travel, but somehow healthy enough for them to leave her behind? We tell them the truth, Vivian said slowly. Grammy is recovering from surgery and needs to rest. The doctors said the best thing for her right now is quiet and sleep. We explained that we're taking this trip partly to give her the space she needs to heal without worrying about entertaining guests or hosting family. That's actually brilliant, Jonathan said admiringly. We're not lying to them. We're reframing our absence as consideration for Mom's needs. The sophistication of their manipulation was breathtaking. They were teaching my grandchildren that abandoning sick family members was actually a form of caring, that leaving someone alone during their most vulnerable time was really about giving them space to heal. What if one of the kids asks why we couldn't wait until Grammy was better so she could come with us? Marcus asked, apparently still trying to work through potential complications. We explained that this was a special opportunity, Vivian replied without hesitation, that the rental house became available at short notice, that the flights were discounted, that sometimes families have to make difficult timing decisions. We emphasize how excited Grammy will be to hear about their adventures when she's feeling better. And, Jonathan added, his voice gaining enthusiasm, we make sure to take lots of pictures and videos to share with her. We get the kids to collect shells and souvenirs. We turn it into a way of including her even though she can't be there. I felt physically sick. They were planning to document their betrayal, to create a multimedia record of the vacation they were stealing from me and then present it to me as a gift. They would show me photos of my grandchildren enjoying experiences I had funded but been excluded from, and they expected me to be grateful for this twisted form of inclusion. We should probably coordinate our stories, Marcus said, his practical nature asserting itself. Make sure we're all telling the same version if Mom asks questions later. Good point, Vivian agreed. Let's say that we decided as a family that we needed some bonding time during this stressful period. That we knew Mom would want us to take care of our emotional health while she focused on physical recovery. That we used family money for a family purpose, just like she's always encouraged us to do. And if she seems upset about not being included? Jonathan asked. We remind her that she was unconscious in an ICU when we made the decision, Vivian replied coolly. That we couldn't exactly consult with her about vacation planning while she was on life support. That we made the best decision we could under difficult circumstances. The casual reference to my having been on life support, something that had terrified me and should have terrified them, being used as justification for their theft was perhaps the most chilling moment of the entire conversation. There's one more thing we need to consider, Marcus said, his voice dropping even lower. What if Mom recovers faster than expected? What if she starts checking her accounts before we get back? That's why we need to move quickly, Vivian said. Make the transfer, book everything, and get out of town before she's alert enough to notice anything unusual. But what if she does notice? Jonathan pressed. What if she calls the bank or tries to reverse the transfer? Then we deal with it, Vivian said firmly. We explain the situation, emphasize that it's family money being used for family purposes, and remind her that she's always been generous with helping us when we needed it. We make it clear that we intended to tell her about it. We just wanted to wait until she was strong enough to hear about it without stress. And if she's really angry? Marcus asked. Then she's angry, Vivian replied with a shrug I could hear in her voice. But what's she going to do? We're her children. This is her money that's going to be ours eventually anyway. We're just accessing our inheritance a little early for a good cause. The breathtaking entitlement in that statement left me speechless. They had convinced themselves that my life savings were actually their money, that I was merely a custodian, holding their inheritance until they decided they wanted to spend it. Plus, Jonathan added, Mom loves us. She might be upset initially, but once she sees how happy the trip made everyone, especially the grandkids, she'll come around. She always does. They were counting on my love for them as a shield against consequences. They believed that my maternal affection would ultimately protect them from any real accountability for their actions. We should probably set a budget, Marcus said, returning to practical matters. How much are we comfortable spending? The house rental we looked at last year was $8,000 for the week, Vivian said, clearly having done research. Flights for all of us will probably be around $12,000. Food, activities, car rentals, and miscellaneous expenses. Maybe another $15,000 to $20,000 if we really want to do it right. So we're talking about $35,000 to $40,000 total, Marcus summarized. Mom has over $800,000 in savings, Jonathan pointed out. This is less than 5% of her total assets. It's not like we're bankrupting her. Exactly, Vivian agreed. And think about all the money she's spent on us over the years. College help, business loans, Emergency assistance? This is probably less than what she's already invested in our various needs. They were using my previous generosity as justification for their current theft, arguing that because I had willingly helped them in the past, they were entitled to help themselves to my money now. Should we set up a group text to coordinate the details? Marcus asked. Absolutely, Vivian replied. But we should be careful about what we put in writing. Nothing about Mom's accounts or the financial arrangements, just general travel coordination. Even in their planning, they were being careful to avoid creating evidence of their theft. They understood that what they were doing was wrong, but they were proceeding anyway with calculated caution. When do we pull the trigger on this? Jonathan asked eagerly. I'll go to the bank first thing tomorrow morning, Vivian said decisively. I'll transfer $45,000 to be safe. That gives us a buffer for unexpected expenses. Then I'll start booking everything immediately. And when do we tell Mom? Marcus asked. When we get back, Vivian replied. When it's over, when everyone had a great time, when she can see the pictures and hear the stories, when the focus is on the positive family memories rather than the financial details. As their conversation wound down and I heard chairs scraping as they prepared to leave, I realized they had planned every aspect of their betrayal except one thing. They had no idea that their supposedly unconscious mother had heard every word of their scheming. They had no idea that I was not only fully aware of their plans, but that I was already formulating my own response to their treachery. After my children left that evening, I lay in the ICU bed staring at the ceiling, my mind racing despite the sedatives in my system. The conversation I had overheard replayed in my head like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Every beep of the heart monitor seemed to echo their casual discussion of stealing my life savings. Every breath I took felt weighted with the knowledge that the people I loved most in the world were planning to betray me in the most calculating way imaginable. But what happened over the next 48 hours would prove that their conversation hadn't been just wishful thinking or stress-induced fantasy. They were deadly serious about their plan, and they moved with a speed and efficiency that suggested they had been considering this opportunity for longer than I had initially realized. The first sign came the following morning when Vivian arrived, earlier than usual, carrying a large coffee and what appeared to be a folder of documents. She kissed my forehead gently, asked the nurse about my condition, and spent several minutes fussing over my comfort, adjusting my pillows, checking that my water cup was full, ensuring the television remote was within reach. I need to run some errands this morning, Mom, she said in the bright, caring tone that I now recognized as calculated performance. Some business things I've been putting off while dealing with your situation, but I'll be back this afternoon to check on you. Business things. I knew exactly what business she was referring to. The business of stealing $45,000 from my savings account. Of course, sweetheart, I managed to say, my voice still weak from the breathing tube that had been removed the day before. Take care of whatever you need to do. She squeezed my hand affectionately, and for a moment, I almost doubted what I had heard. This was Vivian, my artistic daughter who had spent countless hours at my bedside, who had helped me navigate the financial complexities after Theodore's death, who had always been my most organized and reliable child. Could she really be capable of such elaborate deception? I love you, Mom, she said, looking directly into my eyes with what appeared to be genuine emotion. We all do. We're so grateful you're getting better. After she left, I asked the nurse to help me sit up more fully. My strength was returning gradually, and while I was still weak, my mind was becoming clearer with each passing hour. Dr. Hendricks had been right about my recovery prospects. The septic shock had been serious, but my body was responding well to treatment. What Dr. Hendricks couldn't have predicted was that my physical recovery would be overshadowed by the emotional trauma of discovering my children's true nature. Around 11:30 that morning, my phone buzzed with a text message from Vivian. Everything taken care of. Feeling so much better about our family's future. Love you, Mom. My hands shook as I read those words. Everything taken care of. The theft had been completed. $45,000 had been transferred from my savings account to fund their Hawaiian vacation, and she was texting me about it with the kind of coded language that confirmed their awareness of wrongdoing. 20 minutes later, another text arrived, this time from Jonathan. Great news about the family bonding opportunity. Can't wait to make some amazing memories. You focus on getting better, and we'll handle everything else. The speed with which they moved from planning to execution was staggering. Less than 18 hours after their consultation room conversation, they had already accessed my accounts and were apparently booking their vacation. Marcus arrived during his lunch break, bringing flowers and a cheerful demeanor that felt like a slap in the face. He chatted about his work, asked about my pain levels, and mentioned casually that the family was planning some therapeutic activities during my recovery period. The kids have been so worried about you, he said, arranging the flowers in a vase by my window. We thought it might be good for them to have something positive to focus on while you're getting better. What kind of activities? I asked carefully, testing whether he would maintain the deception to my face. Just some family time, he replied vaguely. Maybe a little getaway to help everyone decompress. You know how stress affects the whole family when someone is sick. He looked directly at me as he spoke, and I marveled at his ability to lie so smoothly while appearing genuinely concerned about my well-being. This was my eldest son, the child I had raised to value honesty and integrity, sitting beside my hospital bed and lying about stealing my money with the same ease as discussing the weather. That sounds nice, I said, my voice neutral. Where are you thinking of going? For just a moment, I saw a flicker of uncertainty cross his face. We're still deciding, somewhere relaxing, somewhere that would help the family bond during this difficult time. The afternoon brought a visit from Jonathan, who seemed barely able to contain his excitement. He talked rapidly about his gratitude for my recovery, his appreciation for the strong family bonds we shared, and his certainty that this health crisis would ultimately bring us all closer together. The audacity was breathtaking. He was sitting beside my hospital bed, talking about a celebratory family trip, while already having stolen the money for a family trip that would exclude me entirely. That sounds wonderful, I replied. Where would you like to go? I've always thought Hawaii would be incredible, he said, his eyes lighting up with genuine enthusiasm. Can you imagine the whole family in Maui? The beaches, the sunsets, the activities for the kids? It would be the trip of a lifetime. He was describing the exact vacation he was about to take without me, using my stolen money while pretending it was a future dream we would share together. The level of psychological manipulation was so sophisticated that I wondered if they had practiced these conversations beforehand. Over the next 2 days, the evidence of their deception continued to accumulate. Phone calls that ended abruptly when I woke up. Whispered conversations in the hallway outside my room. Text messages exchanged while they sat beside my bed, smiling at their phones before looking up at me with expressions of loving concern. Marcus brought his teenagers to visit, and I watched with horror as my own grandchildren unknowingly participated in the deception. 16-year-old Emily mentioned being excited about the surprise vacation before Marcus quickly redirected the conversation. 14-year-old David asked if I would be feeling better soon enough to maybe do something fun as a family, his question clearly coached, but delivered with the innocent enthusiasm of a child anticipating adventure. They were using my grandchildren as unwitting accomplices, teaching them that deception was acceptable when it served family purposes, normalizing the idea that sick family members could be excluded from family activities for their own good. On my 4th day since overhearing their initial conversation, Vivian arrived with photo albums and began showing me pictures from family vacations over the years. Remember our trip to Yellowstone? She said, pointing to photos of the children when they were younger. And this one from the beach house we rented in Oregon? She lingered over each image, emphasizing the importance of family memories, the value of shared experiences, the way travel brought families closer together. It was a masterclass in psychological preparation, priming me to accept their upcoming betrayal by reinforcing the narrative that family trips were inherently valuable and meaningful. "I've been thinking," she said as she closed the album, "that when you're fully recovered, we should really prioritize making more memories like these. Life is so short, and health scares like this remind us that we shouldn't put off the experiences that really matter." "I couldn't agree more," I said, maintaining my facade of weakness and compliance while internally documenting every aspect of their manipulation. That evening, after visiting hours ended, I used my bedside phone to call my bank. The automated system allowed me to check my account balance using my Social Security number and PIN. As I suspected, $45,000 had been transferred from my primary savings account to an account registered under Vivian's name. The theft was complete. My children had successfully stolen a substantial portion of my life savings while I lay in a hospital bed, and they had done it with such calculated precision that they had even managed to make me doubt my own perceptions of their character. But what they didn't realize was that their supposedly helpless, medicated, and confused mother was far more aware than they imagined. While they had been planning their perfect crime, I had been planning something of my own. Their vulnerability had always been their assumption that I was too trusting, too generous, and too maternal to ever truly hold them accountable for their actions. They were about to discover just how wrong they had been about their mother's capacity for strategic thinking and decisive action. The same intelligence that had helped Theodore and me build our savings from nothing was now focused on teaching my children the most expensive lesson of their lives. The moment that shattered any remaining doubt about my children's capacity for betrayal came on Friday afternoon, exactly 1 week after I had first overheard their planning session. I had been moved to a regular room the day before, a sign that my recovery was progressing well, and Dr. Hendricks had mentioned that I might be discharged as early as Monday if my improvement continued. All 3 of my children arrived together, around 2 o'clock, which was unusual since their visits had been staggered throughout the week. They carried an air of barely contained excitement that they were trying to mask as concern for my well-being. Marcus had his phone in his hand, Jonathan kept checking his watch, and Vivian carried a small gift bag with tissue paper peeking out the top. "How are you feeling today, Mom?" Vivian asked, kissing my cheek and settling into the chair closest to my bed. "You look so much stronger than yesterday." "I am feeling better," I replied honestly. "Dr. Hendricks thinks I might go home early next week." "That's wonderful news," Marcus said, though something in his expression suggested this timeline was creating complications for him. "But you'll still need to take it easy for a while, right? No stress, no big activities, just rest and recovery?" "That's what she recommended," I confirmed. "A few weeks of quiet recovery at home." The 3 of them exchanged glances, and I recognized the look of people who were about to execute a rehearsed conversation. "Actually, Mom," Jonathan began, settling into a chair with exaggerated casualness, "we wanted to talk to you about something. We've been discussing it as a family, and we think we have a solution that might help everyone during this recovery period." "What kind of solution?" I asked, even though I knew exactly what was coming. Vivian opened the gift bag and pulled out a beautifully wrapped package. "First, we brought you something, a little get-well gift to show how much we love you and how grateful we are that you're okay." Inside the wrapping was an expensive silk scarf in shades of blue and green that would have cost at least $200. It was beautiful, and under different circumstances, I would have been touched by their thoughtfulness. Now knowing it had been purchased with money stolen from my own account, it felt like a mockery. "It's lovely," I said, running the silk through my fingers. "Thank you all." "We wanted to get you something special," Marcus said, "because we know the next few weeks are going to be challenging for you. Recovery can be boring and frustrating, especially for someone as active as you've always been. And that's what we wanted to discuss. Vivian continued seamlessly. We've been thinking about what would be best for your recovery, and we've come up with an idea that we think could benefit everyone. Here it comes, I thought, bracing myself for the elaborate justification they were about to present. You know how stressed we've all been about your health crisis, Jonathan said, leaning forward with an expression of earnest concern. The kids especially have been really worried about Grammy. They've had trouble sleeping, difficulty concentrating, at school. This whole experience has been traumatic for the entire family. The therapist Emily's been seeing suggested that some positive family bonding time might help everyone process the trauma, Marcus added, referencing my granddaughter's counselor. Something to create good memories and remind us all that we're okay, that our family is strong. I noticed how they were using my granddaughter's actual therapy needs to justify their deception. Emily had indeed been seeing a counselor since her grandfather's death 2 years earlier, but I doubted very much that the therapist had recommended a Hawaiian vacation funded by stolen money. So we've been looking into some options for family activities, Vivian said, her voice taking on the enthusiastic tone she used when presenting design concepts to clients. And we found an incredible opportunity that we think could help everyone heal and reconnect. What kind of opportunity? I asked, playing my role in their scripted conversation. A family retreat in Hawaii, Jonathan said, unable to completely suppress his excitement. There's a beautiful house available in Maui, right on the beach, with enough room for all of us, including the kids. It would be a chance for everyone to decompress, to focus on positive experiences, to remember what really matters. It sounds wonderful, I said carefully. When were you thinking of going? Well, that's the thing, Marcus said, and I could see him preparing to deliver what they clearly considered the most delicate part of their pitch. The availability is very limited. The house is only available next week, and at a significant discount because it's short notice. Next week? I repeated. But I'll still be recovering. Dr. Hendricks said no travel for at least a month. Exactly, Vivian said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. And that's what makes this so perfect for your recovery. You'll have the house completely to yourself, total peace and quiet for healing, no family chaos or grandchildren running around disturbing your rest. The audacity of framing their abandonment as a gift to me was breathtaking. We know how much you love having everyone around, Jonathan continued. But honestly, Mom, you need to focus on getting better right now. Having all of us underfoot, especially the teenagers with their noise and energy, probably isn't the best environment for recovery. Plus, Marcus added, we'll be having such a great time and making such wonderful memories that we'll come back with hundreds of stories and photos to share with you. It'll give you something exciting to look forward to while you're resting. They were actually telling me that being excluded from their family vacation was for my own benefit, that I should be grateful to be left behind, and that their enjoyment of my stolen money should be a source of happiness for me. The only issue, Vivian said, lowering her voice as if discussing something slightly embarrassing, is the financial aspect. With all the medical bills and the unexpected nature of this opportunity, we're a bit stretched thin right now. Here was the moment I had been waiting for. The request for permission to steal money they had already stolen. We were hoping, Marcus continued, that you might consider this an investment in the family's emotional well-being, a way of using some of the savings you and Dad accumulated to help all of us heal during a difficult time. How much would this cost? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Around $40,000, Jonathan said quickly. We know it sounds like a lot, but when you break it down per person for a week in Hawaii, it's actually quite reasonable. And think about the value in terms of family bonding and healing. $40,000, I repeated slowly, as if processing this number for the first time. We know it's a significant amount, Vivian said. But Mom, you've always said that experiences are more valuable than money sitting in accounts. This would be creating memories that the grandchildren will treasure forever. They were using my own philosophy about creating experiences over accumulating wealth to justify their theft. Every generous sentiment I had ever expressed was being weaponized against me. And the timing issue means we'd need to book everything today, Marcus added with practiced urgency. The house rental, the flights, all of it has to be confirmed by this evening or we lose the opportunity. Today? I said, letting a note of uncertainty creep into my voice. I know it's sudden, Vivian said soothingly, but sometimes the best opportunities come with tight deadlines. We've already done all the research, found the perfect house, identified activities that would be great for the kids. We just need your blessing to move forward. The word blessing was particularly galling, considering they had already moved forward without any blessing at all. We wouldn't ask if we weren't certain this was the right thing for everyone, Jonathan added. Including you. You'll get the peace and quiet you need for recovery. We'll get the family bonding time that the therapist recommended, and everyone wins. I looked at their faces, Marcus trying to appear responsible and practical, Vivian radiating confidence. In her proposal, Jonathan barely containing his excitement about the adventure ahead. They had rehearsed this presentation carefully, anticipated my possible objections, and prepared responses designed to overcome any resistance. What they hadn't anticipated was that I already knew they had stolen the money, booked the vacation, and were now asking for permission to do something they had already done. This wasn't a request for financial support. It was a psychological manipulation designed to make me complicit in my own betrayal. You've already booked it, haven't you? I said quietly. The silence that followed was deafening. For just a moment, their carefully constructed facades slipped, and I saw flashes of panic cross their faces. What do you mean? Vivian asked, but her voice had lost its confident tone. The house, the flights, the $45,000 you transferred from my savings account yesterday morning. You've already booked everything, and now you're asking for my permission to do something you've already done. The color drained from Marcus's face. Jonathan's mouth fell open. Vivian's composure cracked completely, revealing the calculating manipulator beneath her caring daughter performance. In that moment of stunned silence, I realized that my recovery had given me something far more valuable than my physical health. It had given me absolute clarity about who my children really were and what I needed to do about it. The aftermath of my confrontation was a masterclass in damage control as my 3 children scrambled to salvage their narrative. What followed over the next 10 minutes would have been almost comical if it weren't so devastating to witness the people I had raised resort to increasingly desperate lies and justifications. Marcus was the first to recover his composure, his business training kicking in as he attempted to regain control of a conversation that had spiraled completely out of their control. "Mom, I think there might be some confusion here," he said, his voice taking on the patronizing tone he used with difficult clients. "You've been on a lot of medication, and sometimes that can affect memory and perception. Are you suggesting I imagined $45,000 disappearing from my savings account?" I asked calmly, watching as Vivian's face cycled through a range of expressions: surprise, guilt, anger, and finally, cold calculation. "No one said anything about $45,000, Jonathan protested weakly, though his nervous fidgeting betrayed his words. "We were just asking about your thoughts on a potential family trip." "Jonathan," I said, looking directly at him, "yesterday morning you texted me about great news about the family bonding opportunity and how you couldn't wait to make amazing memories. That was after Vivian had already transferred the money." The Kai specific reference to his text message hit him like a physical blow. His face went pale as he realized that their supposedly unconscious mother had been far more aware of their communications than they had imagined. Vivian, meanwhile, had been silently calculating, and I could see her preparing to launch a counterattack. "Mom, even if there was some kind of financial transaction, which I'm not confirming, you have to understand that we've been under incredible stress. Your health crisis has affected all of us emotionally and financially. Some of us have missed work, had additional expenses, dealt with childcare complications. So you decided to compensate yourselves from my bank account? I asked, marveling at her ability to position theft as reasonable self-care. We decided to use family resources during a family crisis, she corrected sharply. Which is exactly what you've always told us to do. How many times have you said that money is just a tool, that family comes first, that your accounts are really family accounts? She was throwing my own words back at me, using my generosity and family-first philosophy to justify their betrayal. But what came next was even more audacious. Besides, Vivian continued, her voice gaining strength as she warmed to her theme, we weren't stealing anything. We were accessing accounts that I'm legally authorized to use. You added me as a signatory specifically for situations like this. Situations like this? I repeated. You mean situations where you wanted to take a luxury vacation to Hawaii? Situations where the family needed financial resources during a crisis, Marcus interjected, clearly following Vivian's lead in reframing their theft as crisis management. Mom, you've been unconscious or heavily medicated for over a week. We've had to make decisions about family needs without being able to consult you. The sophistication of their argument was breathtaking. They were claiming that stealing money for a vacation was actually responsible family financial management during a medical emergency. What family needs required a trip to Hawaii? I asked. Emotional and psychological needs, Jonathan said earnestly, apparently believing his own justification. The kids have been traumatized by almost losing you. We all have. Sometimes healing requires more than just medical treatment. And you determined that healing required spending my money on a vacation that excluded me? We determined that healing required giving you space to recover while we processed our own trauma, Vivian shot back. You can't take care of everyone. Else if you don't take care of yourself first. I stared at my daughter, amazed by her ability to position selfish abandonment as selfless caregiving. But I had heard enough of their justifications. It was time to let them know exactly how much trouble they were in. I've already spoken with my attorney, I said quietly. The effect was immediate and profound. All three of them went completely still, their expressions shifting from defensive to genuinely alarmed. Your attorney? Marcus asked carefully. Patricia Chen at Morrison, Blackwell and Associates, I confirmed, naming the law firm that had handled Theodore's estate planning. I called her this morning to discuss unauthorized access to my accounts and potential elder financial abuse charges. Mom, you can't be serious, Jonathan said, his voice cracking slightly. We're your children. This is a family matter, not a legal issue. Taking $45,000 from someone's bank account without permission is a legal issue regardless of family relationships, I replied. Patricia was very clear about that. This was actually true. I had indeed called Patricia Chen that morning, using the bedside phone after the nursing staff had helped me sit up more comfortably. Patricia had been shocked by what I described and had immediately begun outlining potential legal remedies and protections. Elder financial abuse is a serious felony in this state, I continued, watching their faces as the implications sank in, particularly when it involves exploitation of someone during a medical crisis. But you're going to be fine, Vivian protested. The doctor said you're recovering well. This isn't elder abuse. You're not incapacitated. I was incapacitated when you took the money, I pointed out. I was unconscious in an ICU, on life support, with no ability to monitor my accounts or consent to transactions. You had already given me authorization to access those accounts, Vivian insisted desperately. For emergencies, I corrected, not for funding family vacations. Patricia was very interested in the distinction between emergency access and recreational theft. Marcus had been quiet during this exchange, and I could see him working through the legal and professional implications. A financial crime conviction would destroy his career in pharmaceutical sales, where trust and integrity were paramount. What did the attorney recommend? He asked in a voice barely above a whisper. She recommended several options, I said calmly. Criminal charges, civil. Recovery, restraining orders, removal of all account access privileges. She also recommended documenting everything. The timing of the theft, the coordination between you three, the attempted manipulation in this room today. "You've been recording us?" Jonathan asked, his voice rising in panic. "I don't need to record." "You?" I replied. "The bank records speak for themselves. The text messages you've been sending provide additional evidence. And the three of you just spent the last 20 minutes lying to my face while trying to get me to approve a theft you had already committed." The room fell into a tense silence as they absorbed the reality of their situation. They had assumed that their loving, generous mother would never actually pursue legal action against her own children. They had counted on my maternal instincts to protect them from the consequences of their actions. What they hadn't anticipated was that their betrayal had fundamentally altered my perspective on the relationship between love and accountability. However, I continued, "Patricia also mentioned that criminal charges aren't the only option if the money is returned immediately and certain conditions are met." I watched as hope flickered in their eyes. They were still looking for a way out that wouldn't require them to face real consequences for their actions. "What kind of conditions?" Marcus asked cautiously. "Complete transparency about your financial situations," I said. "Full disclosure of debts, expenses, and the real reasons you felt entitled to steal from me. Written agreements regarding future, access to any of my accounts or assets, and most importantly, immediate cancellation of your Hawaiian vacation." "Cancel the trip?" Jonathan said, his voice filled with genuine distress. "But we've already paid for everything. The flights, the house rental, the activities. We'd lose all the money." "You'd lose my money," I corrected. "Money you stole. And, yes, you'd lose it, just like people usually lose money when they make criminal decisions." "Mom," Vivian said, her voice taking on a pleading tone that I hadn't heard since she was a child. "Please don't do this. We can work this out as a family. We don't need lawyers and legal threats." "We needed to work this out as a family before you stole my money," I replied. "Now we need lawyers because my own children decided to commit felonies against their sick mother." The stark language seemed to hit them like physical blows. For the first time since this nightmare began, they appeared to understand the true gravity of what they had done. What happened next would test not only my children's commitment to accountability, but also reveal how our extended family and community would respond to this unprecedented crisis. By Sunday morning, exactly 48 hours after my confrontation with my children, the carefully contained family drama was about to explode into a much larger public reckoning. My first call was to my sister Carmen, who lived 3 hours away, in Cedar Falls. Carmen was 2 years younger than me, a retired high school principal with a no-nonsense approach to family problems and an unwavering sense of right and wrong. If anyone would give me honest perspective on this situation, it would be her. "Eleanor?" Carmen's voice was immediately concerned when she heard my hospital room number on the caller ID. "How are you feeling? The kids told me you were doing much better." "Carmen, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen carefully without interrupting," I said, settling back against my pillows for what I knew would be a difficult conversation. For the next 20 minutes, I laid out the entire story, from overhearing their initial planning session to discovering the theft to Friday's devastating confrontation. Carmen listened in complete silence, which was unusual for her, and when I finished, the pause stretched so long I wondered if the call had been disconnected. "Those ungrateful, calculating little thieves," Carmen finally exploded, her voice carrying the righteous fury I had hoped for but been afraid to express myself. "Eleanor, I am so sorry. I am so damn sorry that your own children could do something this despicable." "I don't know what to do, Carmen," I admitted, feeling tears threaten for the first time since this ordeal began. "Part of me wants to press charges and teach them a lesson they'll never forget, but part of me is terrified of destroying my relationship with my grandchildren." "Let me ask you something," Carmen said, her voice softening slightly. If a stranger had done this to you, accessed your accounts while you were unconscious in the ICU and stolen $45,000 for a vacation, what would you do? I'd have them arrested immediately, I replied without hesitation. Then, why should your own children get better treatment than strangers? Why should family relationships shield them from consequences that anyone else would face? It was a question I had been wrestling with, and hearing Carmen voice it so directly crystallized something important for me. My children were counting on my love for them to protect them from accountability. But real love sometimes required the courage to let people face the consequences of their choices. There's something else you need to know, Carmen continued. I got a call yesterday from Marcus. He wanted to know if I had heard about their therapeutic family trip and whether I thought it was a good idea for everyone's emotional healing. My blood pressure spiked. He called you? Oh, it gets better, Carmen said grimly. He explained that you were struggling with some confusion and memory issues related to your medications, and that you had been making concerning statements about financial matters. He was wondering if I might talk to you about supporting the family during this difficult time. The audacity was staggering. Not only had they stolen my money, but they were now attempting to discredit my mental competency to other family members, laying groundwork to dismiss my accusations as medication-induced confusion. What did you tell him? I asked. I told him. I'd call you directly to discuss it, Carmen replied, which is exactly what I'm doing. Eleanor, they're not just stealing from you. They're trying to systematically undermine your credibility with anyone who might support you. This revelation transformed my understanding of their strategy. This wasn't just opportunistic theft. It was a calculated campaign to isolate me and control the narrative around their actions. I think you need to go public with this, Carmen continued. Not just family public, really public. These kids have gotten away with too much for too long because you've always protected them from consequences. It's time for them to face real accountability. What do you mean by really public? I mean post about it on social media. Tell your friends at the church. Contact the local newspaper. Make it impossible for them to hide behind family privacy while they destroy your reputation and steal your money. The suggestion terrified me. Our family had always handled problems privately, maintaining a dignified silence about internal conflicts. But Carmen was right. My children had already broken that tradition by attempting to manipulate extended family members and discredit my mental competency. Think about this, Eleanor, Carmen pressed. Right now, they're painting you as a confused, elderly woman whose medications are affecting her judgment. If you stay silent, that becomes the accepted narrative. If you speak publicly with documented evidence, people will see the truth. That afternoon, I called my longtime friend Margaret Willis, who had been my closest confidant for over 20 years. Margaret had known my children since they were young, had celebrated their achievements, and had always been supportive of my parenting decisions. Margaret, I need to share something with you that's going to shock you, I began, and proceeded to tell her the entire story. Margaret's response was immediate and unequivocal. Eleanor, those children need to face criminal charges. What they've done is not just theft. It's elder abuse, it's exploitation of your medical crisis, and it's absolutely unforgivable. But they're my children, I said weakly. And you're their mother who almost died last week, Margaret shot back. A mother who has given them everything, supported them through every difficulty, and deserved their love and protection during her most vulnerable time. Instead, they saw your near-death experience as a business opportunity. Margaret's anger on my behalf was both validating and energizing. But what she said next surprised me. I have to tell you something, Eleanor. This isn't the first time I've wondered about your children's attitude toward your money. What do you mean? Remember last Christmas when we were all at your house for dinner? I overheard Vivian and Jonathan talking in the kitchen about how much money you probably had just sitting around and how you could afford to be more generous with family expenses. At the time, I thought it was just typical adult children griping about parental financial decisions, but now it sounds like they'd been planning this for a while. I finished. Exactly. Eleanor, I think you need to consider that this theft might not have been a spontaneous decision driven by your medical crisis. It might have been something they'd been looking for an opportunity to do. That evening, I made a decision that would have been unthinkable just a week earlier. I composed a detailed Facebook post explaining exactly what had happened, including screenshots of the bank transfers, copies of the manipulative text messages, and a clear timeline of events. I am sharing this publicly because my children have begun contacting family members to suggest that my medications are affecting my mental clarity, I wrote. I want everyone to see the documented evidence of what actually happened while I was unconscious in the ICU fighting for my life. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, I had received dozens of supportive comments from friends, neighbors, and extended family members. Many shared their own stories of financial exploitation by family members, creating a thread of solidarity that I hadn't expected. But the most significant response came from an unexpected source. My granddaughter Emily, Marcus's 16-year-old daughter, who commented publicly on the post. Grammy, I am so sorry this happened to you. Dad told us you were confused about money stuff because of your medicine, but this post shows everything clearly. I can't believe they lied to us about why you weren't coming on the trip. I don't want to go to Hawaii if it means stealing from you. This is wrong. Within minutes, that comment had been liked by dozens of people, including several of my children's friends and colleagues. My granddaughter's public support had fundamentally shifted the narrative from confused elderly woman to grandmother betrayed by her own children. The post also caught the attention of someone I hadn't expected, Jennifer Martinez, a reporter, for the Willowbrook Weekly, who sent me a private message asking if I would be willing to discuss my experience for an article about elder financial abuse in families. Mrs. Blackwood, your story illustrates a growing problem that many families face but rarely discuss publicly, she wrote. Would you consider sharing your experience to help other elderly community members recognize and protect themselves from similar exploitation? By Monday morning, less than 24 hours after my post went live, my children's carefully constructed narrative had completely collapsed. Their theft was no longer a private family matter that could be managed through manipulation and gaslighting. It had become a public case study in family financial abuse, documented with evidence and supported by community outrage. The 24 hours following my Facebook post brought consequences that my children had never imagined possible. What started as their private family theft had exploded into a community-wide scandal that would follow them for years to come. By Tuesday morning, the cascading effects of their exposure were reaching into every aspect of their lives. The first major blow came to Marcus at his workplace. Cascade Pharmaceuticals had a strict ethics policy regarding employee conduct, particularly anything involving financial crimes or breach of trust. When a colleague saw my Facebook post and recognized Marcus from family photos, they forwarded it to Human Resources with a note about potential character concerns for someone handling sensitive client accounts. Marcus called me Tuesday morning, his voice shaking with panic and rage. Mom, you have to take down that Facebook post. My boss wants to meet with me this afternoon about character issues that might impact client confidence. You could cost me my job. You could have cost yourself your job when you decided to steal $45,000 from your sick mother, I replied calmly. Actions have consequences, Marcus. This is yours. But my family depends on my income, he protested. Emily and David need me to keep working. You can't destroy my career over a family disagreement. A family disagreement? I repeated, marveling at his continued minimization. Marcus, you committed a felony. You stole from me while I was unconscious and then lied about it to my face. That's not a disagreement. That's a crime. I'll pay back every penny, he said desperately. We'll cancel the trip, return all the money, whatever you want. Just please take down the post. You had the opportunity to do the right thing when I confronted you Friday, I reminded him. Instead, you spent 20 minutes lying to me and trying to make me complicit in my own theft. Now you want mercy after your criminal behavior became public? The call ended with Marcus hanging up on me, but the damage to his professional reputation was already done. By evening, I learned through Margaret that Marcus had been placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation into his personal conduct issues. Vivian's consequences came through her business relationships. Several of her graphic design clients, prominent members of Willowbrook's business community, had seen my post and were uncomfortable continuing their relationships with someone who had stolen from their elderly mother. The owner of Cascade Valley Boutique, one of Vivian's largest accounts, called her Tuesday afternoon to terminate their contract immediately. "Mrs. Blackwood, I'm calling to express my support for you," boutique owner Sarah Chen told me when she called that evening. "What your daughter did is unconscionable, and I want you to know that our business community won't tolerate that kind of behavior. We take care of our elderly residents here." "I appreciate your support more than you know," I replied, touched by this unexpected solidarity from someone I barely knew. "I've also shared your post with the Willowbrook Business Association," Sarah continued. "We're discussing ways to help protect other elderly community members from family financial exploitation. Your courage in speaking out is helping more people than you realize." Jonathan faced perhaps the most immediate consequences, because he was still living paycheck to paycheck and depended heavily on his reputation for finding new employment opportunities. 2 potential employers who had been considering him for positions withdrew their offers after learning about the theft through social media connections. But the most devastating consequence for all 3 of them came from an unexpected source: the Willowbrook Police Department. Detective Lisa Rodriguez called me Wednesday morning to inform me that they had opened an investigation into my case based on the documented evidence in my Facebook post. "Mrs. Blackwood, elder financial abuse is a priority crime in our jurisdiction," Detective Rodriguez explained. "The evidence you've provided, bank records, text messages, witness statements, gives us probable cause to pursue criminal charges, regardless of whether you file a formal complaint." "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means that sometimes the state pursues charges in elder abuse cases, even when families prefer to handle things privately," she said. "The community has an interest in protecting vulnerable residents and deterring these crimes." "Are you saying you're going to arrest my children whether I want you to or not?" "I'm saying we're investigating, and the evidence is quite compelling. However, your cooperation would strengthen any potential case significantly." That afternoon, Detective Rodriguez visited me at home. I had been discharged from the hospital Monday morning and was recovering comfortably in my own bedroom. She reviewed the evidence methodically, took formal statements, and explained the potential charges. "Based on what I've seen, we could charge all 3 with conspiracy to commit elder financial abuse, theft in the first degree, and potentially racketeering given the coordinated nature of their actions," she said. "These are serious felonies with potential prison time." Prison time. The reality hit me like a physical blow. "Mrs. Blackwood, they stole $45,000 from an incapacitated elderly person during a medical crisis. That's not a family squabble. That's a serious crime that the courts take very seriously." Wednesday evening brought the most dramatic development yet. All 3 of my children arrived at my house together, looking haggard and desperate. They had clearly been coordinating their approach, but their previous confidence had been replaced by genuine fear. "Mom," Vivian began, her voice lacking its usual authoritative tone, "we need to talk about resolving this situation." "What situation?" I asked from my recliner, where I was genuinely resting and recovering, but also strategically maintaining the appearance of an elderly woman who had been victimized. "The police situation," Marcus said bluntly. "Detective Rodriguez contacted all of us today. We could be facing serious criminal charges." "Yes, I'm aware," I replied calmly. She briefed me on the potential charges this afternoon. "Mom, you have to understand," Jonathan pleaded. We never intended for things to go this far. We made a mistake, but we're family. Family should protect each other. Where was that family protection when I was unconscious in the ICU and you were planning to steal my money? I asked. We've learned our lesson, Vivian said quickly. We understand now that what we did was wrong. We're prepared to make full restitution plus damages. We'll pay back every penny plus interest, whatever you think is fair. You mean you'll pay back my money with my money? I pointed out. Since none of you have $45,000 to return. We'll work out payment plans, Marcus said desperately. We'll sell things, take second jobs, whatever it takes. But please talk to the detective about not pursuing charges. We have children to think about, Vivian added, playing what they clearly considered their strongest card. Emily and David don't deserve to have their father go to prison. Think about what criminal convictions would do to your grandchildren. I am thinking about my grandchildren, I replied firmly. I'm thinking about what kind of lesson they learn. If they see their parents steal from their grandmother and face no real consequences. I'm thinking about what kind of people they'll become if they grow up believing that family relationships excuse criminal behavior. But prison? Jonathan asked, his voice cracking. Mom, please. We're your children. We made a terrible mistake, but we're still your children. I looked at these three adults who had raised, supported, and loved unconditionally for decades. They were indeed still my children, but they were also criminals who had betrayed me in the most calculating way imaginable. You're my children who committed felonies against me, I said quietly. And now you're asking me to protect you from the consequences of choices you made as adults. The same way I've always protected you from consequences, which is probably how we got here in the first place. The room fell silent as the implications of my words settled over them. For the first time since this nightmare began, they seemed to understand that their mother's unconditional love would no longer shield them from accountability. The detective will make her recommendations to the prosecutor, I continued. The courts will decide what happens next. That's how justice works when crimes are committed, even when they're committed by people we love. As they left my house, that evening I knew that our family would never be the same. But for the first time in weeks, I felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. The truth was finally fully exposed, and the consequences were finally being delivered by someone other than me. 6 months have passed since that devastating week in the ICU when I discovered who my children really were beneath the surface of their loving facades. As I sit in my sunroom this morning, watching the autumn leaves fall in my backyard, I can honestly say that while the journey has been painful beyond anything I could have imagined, it has also been transformative in ways I never expected. The legal proceedings concluded 3 months ago. Marcus pleaded guilty to conspiracy and theft charges and received 2 years of probation, 200 hours of community service, and was required to make full restitution. His pharmaceutical career ended permanently. No company in that industry will hire someone with a financial crime conviction. He now works as a warehouse supervisor, making about half his previous salary. Vivian fought the charges initially, maintaining that her authorized access to my accounts made her actions legal. However, when Detective Rodriguez demonstrated that she had used that access for personal benefit rather than emergency necessity, and when the prosecutor presented evidence of the coordinated planning, she accepted a plea agreement similar to Marcus's. Her graphic design business never recovered from the scandal, and she now works for a small advertising firm in the next county. Jonathan, surprisingly, accepted responsibility most readily. Perhaps because he had the least to lose professionally, or perhaps because his conscience finally caught up with him, he pleaded guilty immediately and cooperated fully with the investigation. His probation includes mandatory financial counseling and career development programs. The $45,000 was returned in full, plus interest and legal fees, bringing the total restitution to just over $52,000. They're paying it back in monthly installments that will continue for the next 4 years. Every payment serves as a reminder of their betrayal and the cost of their choices. But the most significant change hasn't been in their circumstances. It's been in our family relationships. The old dynamics of enablement and unconditional rescue are over. In their place, we're building something more honest, more respectful, and ultimately more loving, though it's taken months of family counseling to get here. The counselor, Dr. Rebecca Martinez, helped us understand patterns that had been decades in the making. My well-intentioned generosity had created a sense of entitlement in my children that grew over time until they began viewing my resources as their own. Their increasing financial demands had been a progression toward the ultimate theft, not an isolated incident. Eleanor, Dr. Martinez explained during one of our joint sessions, your children learned that love meant never facing consequences, that family meant unlimited access to financial rescue, and that your role was to solve their problems rather than allow them to develop their own resilience. It was painful to recognize my part in creating the conditions that made their betrayal possible. My desire to be a loving, generous mother had inadvertently taught them that my love could be measured by my willingness to sacrifice my own interests for theirs. The rebuilding process began with Marcus's children, my grandchildren Emily and David. Their response to learning the truth about their parents' actions was initially devastating, but ultimately became a source of hope for our family's future. Emily, now 17, wrote me a letter that I treasure more than any gift I've ever received. Grammy, she wrote, I'm ashamed of what my parents did to you, but I'm proud of how you handled it. You showed me that love doesn't mean protecting people from the consequences of their choices. Real love means holding people accountable so they can become better. David, now 15, struggled more with the situation, but has gradually come to understand why I couldn't simply forgive and forget. I thought families were supposed to stick together no matter what, he told me during one of our private conversations. But I guess sticking together means everyone has to act like family, not just expect family treatment. These young people, who could have been turned against me by their parents' bitterness, instead became allies in creating a healthier family dynamic. They visit me regularly, and we're building relationships based on mutual respect rather than financial expectations. The most challenging relationship to repair has been with Vivian. Her sense of entitlement ran deepest, and her anger about facing consequences has been the most persistent. For months, she maintained that I had destroyed the family by going public with their theft instead of handling it privately. Only recently, during a particularly difficult counseling session, did she finally acknowledge the reality of what they had done. I convinced myself that we deserved that money, she admitted, tears streaming down her face. I convinced myself that you owed it to us for all the years we were good children. I turned your generosity into a debt you owed us. That breakthrough allowed us to begin rebuilding trust, though it will be a long process. Vivian is learning to ask for help instead of taking what she wants, and I'm learning to offer support without creating dependency. Marcus has thrown himself into making amends through actions rather than words. He's volunteered with the Willowbrook Senior Center, helping elderly residents protect themselves from financial scams. Watching him educate other seniors about the warning signs of family financial abuse has been both heartbreaking and healing. Jonathan has perhaps changed the most dramatically. The theft and its consequences forced him to confront his pattern of financial irresponsibility and dependence on others. He's now enrolled in a vocational training program for medical technology and hasn't asked me for money once since the incident. The community response continues to be overwhelmingly supportive. My story became part of a statewide initiative to protect elderly residents from financial exploitation. I've spoken at several community events, sharing my experience to help other families recognize and prevent similar situations. Detective Rodriguez recently told me that my case led to the arrest of 3 other families engaged in elder financial abuse in our county. Your willingness to go public gave other victims the courage to report their own situations, she said. You've helped more people than you'll ever know. Perhaps most importantly, I've discovered strength I didn't know I possessed. For too many years, I defined my worth through my ability to solve my children's problems and meet their needs. Learning to set boundaries, to allow them to face consequences, and to prioritize my own well-being has been liberating. My health has fully recovered, and at 68, I'm more active and engaged than I've been in years. I've joined the Willowbrook Community Theater, taken up watercolor painting, and am considering traveling to Europe next spring, something Theodore and I always planned to do but kept postponing for family obligations. The beach house that started this whole nightmare? I kept it, of course. But now, when my children visit, they come as invited guests rather than entitled inheritors. They contribute to groceries, help with maintenance, and express genuine gratitude for the privilege of spending time in a home they once planned to claim for themselves. To anyone facing similar family betrayals, I want you to know that choosing accountability over enablement is the most loving thing you can do. It's painful, it's lonely sometimes, and it requires courage you might not think you have. But real love, the kind that transforms rather than enables, sometimes requires us to let people we love face the consequences of their choices. My children are better people now than they were 6 months ago, not despite the consequences they faced, but because of them. And I'm a stronger, more self-respecting woman than I ever was when my identity depended on their approval and appreciation. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give our families is the gift of truth, even when that truth comes with consequences. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do is refuse to protect people from the results of their own choices. And sometimes, the family that emerges from crisis is stronger, healthier, and more genuinely loving than the family that existed before. The ICU may have saved my life, but learning to set boundaries saved my soul. 1 year later, I received a phone call that would bring this story full circle in a way I never could have anticipated. It was a Tuesday morning in late October, exactly 1 year after the legal proceedings had concluded, and I was enjoying my morning coffee while reviewing travel brochures for my upcoming trip to Italy. Mrs. Blackwood, this is Jessica Torres from the Cascade Valley Community Foundation. I'm calling because we've received an unusual donation request that specifically mentions your story. I set down my coffee cup, curious about what connection a local foundation might have to my family's ordeal. A donation request? I asked. Yes, ma'am. We've received a check for $45,000 from Marcus, Vivian, and Jonathan Blackwood, along with a letter requesting that we establish the Eleanor Blackwood Family Financial Protection Fund. The letter explains that this money represents restitution. They paid to you for theft, and they want it used to help other elderly community members protect themselves from family financial exploitation. I was speechless. The money they had spent the past year paying back to me, money that had come from their reduced salaries, second jobs, and sacrificed luxuries, they had somehow managed to save up again to donate in my name. Mrs. Blackwood, are you still there? Yes, I'm here, I managed. I'm just surprised. According to their letter, they want this fund to provide free legal consultations for elderly residents, educational workshops about financial protection, and emergency assistance for seniors who have been victims of family theft. They've requested that you be consulted about how the fund should be administered. That evening, Marcus called me for the first time in months outside of our scheduled family counseling sessions. Mom, I know you probably heard about the foundation donation by now, he said, his voice carrying a nervousness I hadn't heard since he was a teenager confessing to a mistake. I did, I replied carefully. I have to admit, I'm confused about where that money came from. We've all been working extra jobs for the past 6 months, he explained. After we finished paying you back, we kept working those extra hours and saving everything we made. Vivian's been doing freelance design work in the evenings. Jonathan got certified as a part-time EMT, and I've been doing weekend security work. But why? I asked, genuinely puzzled. You fulfilled your legal obligations. The restitution was complete. Because paying you back was just the beginning, Marcus said quietly. That money represented our debt to you personally, but it didn't address the damage we did to our family's integrity or the example we set for our kids. We wanted to do something that would honor what you taught us through this whole experience. Vivian's voice came through the speaker. Apparently this was a three-way call. And we realized, Jonathan added, that the best way to really make amends was to help prevent other families from going through what we put you through. I felt tears welling up for the first time in months, not tears of pain or betrayal, but tears of something that felt remarkably like pride. The fund will provide exactly the kind of support you needed but didn't have, Marcus continued. Legal help for elderly people who discover family theft, counseling for families dealing with financial betrayal, and education to prevent these situations from happening in the first place. We met with a lawyer, Vivian said, and structured it so that every year on the anniversary of what we did to you, we'll make another donation to keep the fund growing. We want this to be our legacy, Jonathan added. Instead of being known as the family that stole from their sick mother, we want to be known as the family that learned from their mistakes and dedicated themselves to helping others. 3 weeks later, I attended the official launch of the Eleanor Blackwood Family Financial Protection Fund at the Willowbrook Community Center. The room was packed with elderly residents, their adult children, social workers, and local officials. Detective Rodriguez spoke about the prevalence of family financial abuse and the importance of community resources for victims. Dr. Martinez discussed the psychological patterns that enable these crimes. And then, to my complete surprise, my granddaughter Emily approached the podium. My name is Emily Blackwood, and I'm here to talk about what it means when someone you love holds you accountable for your actions, she began, her 17-year-old voice strong and clear. A year ago, my father, aunt, and uncle stole money from my grandmother while she was unconscious in the hospital. When she found out, she could have quietly handled it within our family. She could have protected them from consequences to keep the peace. Instead, she chose to hold them accountable publicly, and that choice saved our family. The room was completely silent as Emily continued. My parents had to face criminal charges, pay restitution, and deal with public shame. At first, I was angry at my grandmother for what seemed like destroying our family. But I've learned that she didn't destroy our family, she saved it. She taught all of us that love doesn't mean protecting people from the consequences of their choices. Real love means caring enough to let people learn from their mistakes. This fund exists because my grandmother chose truth over peace, accountability over comfort, and real love over false harmony. And because my parents chose to learn from their consequences instead of just resenting them. After the ceremony, as people mingled and discussed the fund's resources, Marcus approached me with David at his side. "Mom, I have something to give you," he said, pulling an envelope from his jacket pocket. David wrote this for a school assignment, about family heroes. I think you should read it. Inside was a handwritten essay titled, "My Hero, My Great-Grandmother Eleanor." David had written about learning that real strength sometimes means making unpopular choices, that genuine love requires courage, and that the most important thing a family can have is honesty. My great-grandmother taught me that being loyal to your family doesn't mean covering up their mistakes, he had written. It means caring enough about them to help them become better people, even when that's hard for everyone. As I folded the essay and put it back in the envelope, I looked around the community center at the faces of elderly residents learning about financial protection, adult children discussing healthy family boundaries, and my own family, humbled, changed, but genuinely united for the first time in years. The fund would go on to help 127 families in its first year of operation, providing legal assistance to elderly victims of family theft, counseling for families torn apart by financial betrayal, and education programs that prevented countless other situations like ours. But perhaps more importantly, it became a symbol that transformation is possible, that consequences can lead to growth, and that sometimes the most devastating betrayals can become the foundation for the most meaningful redemption. My children didn't just pay me back the money they stole. They paid it forward, turning their worst mistake into their greatest contribution to our community. And me? I learned that the strength I found in that ICU bed, the courage I discovered when I chose accountability over enabling, wasn't just about protecting myself from exploitation. It was about loving my family enough to help them become the people they were capable of being, even when that required letting them face the full weight of their choices. Sometimes the most painful chapters of our lives become the ones we're most grateful for in the end. Sometimes the people who hurt us most deeply are the same people who teach us our greatest lessons about strength, boundaries, and authentic love. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, a family that almost destroys itself through betrayal can rebuild itself into something stronger, more honest, and more genuinely loving than it ever was before. The Eleanor Blackwood Family Financial Protection Fund continues to operate today, a living reminder that even our worst mistakes can become the seeds of our most meaningful contributions to the world. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.